If the audience was able to see what's outside of the frame that we present, pandemonium and chaos that's occurring just outside the frame borders with boom bikes and groups holding things and people trying to feed a rope from the bottom. I mean, all the comedy that's going on the periphery of that little rectangle that we're presenting. It is a circus.
Hello, you're watching and listening to the voice of Virtual Production, an exclusive series by Synapse and Little Black Book. Across the episodes of this video interview series, we'll hear from industry-leading experts about how the world of production's transforming and discover how to get the most out of cutting-edge virtual production tech.
My name's Adam Bennett, and I'm a writer at Little Black Book. I'm thrilled to be joined by two perfect guests to discuss cinematography through a virtual production lens.
Christopher Probst is Synapse's very own Chief Innovation Officer, and as well as his ASC-nominated work on David Fincher's Mindhunter series, he shot work for brands like Nike, Google, BMW and Samsung. Christopher, can I say you are looking fantastic over there?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we're actually on our virtual production stage in Los Angeles, so we've sort of set up a little more of a cinematic backdrop here for this series.
And am I right in thinking that we're going to be seeing more of what that backdrop can do as we go through the episodes of the series?
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Fantastic. We're also very lucky to be joined by an Academy Award-winning cinematographer, someone who needs no introduction.
What a great way to be introduced. That's really cool. Thank you.
Sorry, that's I'm taking the piss. I do have a proper introduction for you. I just thought less is more, as it is the cinematography episode.
I love it.
Let me lead into that again. If, like me, you think that movies like Dune Parts 1 and 2, The Batman, Star Wars Rogue One, The Creator, and Zero Dark 30 are cinematic masterpieces, then you have Greig Fraser to thank. Greig is an Academy Award-winning cinematographer and is one of the industry's most respected voices. His work more than speaks for itself, though to be clear, today he will be speaking. We're delighted to have him on the show. Greig, how are you doing?
Good, Adam, thank you. And I too am sitting in my virtual production studio here in London with my background, which is actually my apartment background.
It's cutting edge.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start off by kind of tackling maybe the most obvious question first of all, which is that the term virtual production has come to encompass a lot of different filmmaking technologies and even techniques. So can I start by asking you both what jumps to your mind when you hear the words virtual production?
You know, it's a really good question because a lot of people use the word virtual production in a very kind of overarching term. I've heard people in the past go, we'll do it with virtual production. What do you think of virtual production? Like there's a whole, like virtual production's kind of used as a bit of a buzzword, sort of like AI, like people are using AI as the buzzword, not really fully understanding necessarily where virtual production starts and stops and how it can be really useful. The days that we did the Mandalorian on the volume and what's happening now with virtual production stages, that's a small part of a bigger picture of what virtual production entails. Virtual production can go all the way from planning a shoot, using 3D engine like Unreal to build, to design the set, to light the set, to frame the set, to doing sun paths on location in that program, all the way through to post-production, where you're as a cinematographer, we're lensing a shot or designing a shot that the guys in CG a year later are actually working on, because that's kind of, there's always been a problem where as a cinematographer we get to shoot what's there on the day and we don't really get to shoot the CG. There's that taken care of by a sort of different department, which has never really sort of made sense to me, that another department is designing and shooting entire backgrounds, entire scenes for you. So CG, so virtual production sort of runs the gamut, a lot of areas, which I think is really exciting because it's essentially helping filmmakers.
Christopher, does that chime with you?
Yeah, it's funny because if you look at what's behind me, there's a a whole legacy of different approaches in cinema that this is a direct descendant of. If you roll back the clock all the way to painted backdrops for, Gone with the Wind, they would do Savannah, Georgia, outside the windows of a plantation estate, or Wizard of Oz, a big cloudscape or something, right? And that it was a backdrop that had then sets put in front of it, and you're sort of trying to create this sense of a reality out of this false technique. And then you go to rear screen projection. In a Hitchcock movie, you had Jimmy Stewart driving in a car, and he'd turn the wheel, but the background would go the opposite direction. It wasn't really like timed and perfectly in sync with what the performer was doing. He couldn't see where he was driving. And then you kind of go a little forward in visual effects, and they have to have blue screens and green screens, and they had to imagine the environment they were in, looking at a tennis ball and saying, that's a big creature, rah, and you don't really feel the environment. And also the lighting on them is contaminated by this blue-green void, and then you have to contend with that lighting-wise, and you're not getting the interactivity of it. And then you talk about car process and trying to get the interactive lighting, and you would have people panning a light and trying to create a backdrop, or in creating that interactivity. And now with the introduction of high-resolution LED panels, both for video content and certainly with 3D environments generated through a video game engine like Unreal Engine or Unity, we're able to bring environmental lighting and backdrops the same way that painted backing or a trans light or a rear screen projection would have, but it's dynamic, it's interactive. You can put it outside a window in a living room, and you have traffic going by outside that living room window, and you have fireflies in the air, right? Or a Manhattan skyscraper, and you see like airplanes flying in the distance. So that aspect alone is really exciting, because it sort of puts the authorship back into the filmmaker's hands. You have the director and the cinematographer looking at a shot and doing the composite in frame live. And now you're saying, oh, what do you think? Is it too bright? Is it too dark? Or you want to make this warmer, a little moodier? Or like, we're actually framing up a shot. So for me, virtual production is all of those things. Still in legacy, it's like that's what you're trying to do. You're creating this verisimilitude of reality, but it's a completely fabrication, where it's a cinematographic sleight of hand. We're all like trying to play with, magician's tricks of forcing a sense of depth out of a 2D image that you're looking on a projection or a screen, and saying, this feels like it's three-dimensional. This feels like, we have separation. In black and white, there was all tones of gray trying to create that separation. Now we have color. We can do color contrast, like I have a warm on my face and a cooler background. Virtual production is harnessing all of those and doing it in camera and giving the power back to the filmmakers. So it's something that really excites me, and I credit where credit is due. I've been following Greig's career for a number of years, and certainly with introducing that at the onset on Rogue One, like doing some of those, hyperspace interactive lighting, you're getting all those reflections dynamically, and then obviously the watershed moment was with Mandalorian, and really taking what Jon Favreau was playing with Lion King and Jungle Book and virtual production, VR kind of aspects, and then doing it live though in camera with the LED walls was sort of a step function change, order of magnitude improvement on the technique. So that really gained my interest. Like, okay, I need to get ahead of this technology. I need to understand this, because wow, this is incredible.
Greig, I saw an old quote of yours. You spoke about truthfulness in cinematography, or ensuring that every shot is grounded in a sense of reality. How do you balance doing that with using the latest tech? How easy is that to do? Is it challenging?
Well, again, going back to kind of, my definition of, say, virtual production, which is, from the planning stages, building sets in 3D, in Unreal, lighting them, gives us as the filmmakers, as Chris was just saying, about giving the putting the power back into the hand of the filmmakers, because we are the most, say, cinematographers of all the crew are pretty much the most well-versed in understanding light and how it behaves on actors and actresses and sets and what it does emotionally, because that's what we do for 14 hours a day. even in our days off, we study that. We read the lens manual to understand what different lenses do to skin and to people's faces, to understand those things. So the more tools that we have in order to prepare for the actual short amount of window that we've been given to shoot something allows us to then find that truthfulness or find that honesty, having already laid the groundwork to get to that point. Making sure that you're not walking into an environment that you can't film the scene that is required, or you can't light the scene that's required because you've been sort of painted into a box by decisions that you hadn't made. So by giving the creatives on a film set access to those tools, it kind of allows more things to be done on the day and more decisions to be sort of made in the right way. Now, I've had discussions with people about saying sometimes if you have too many options, that can lead people down a path and can take too long to be adjusting backgrounds. And, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that you give the right people the right tools and you'll end up with stuff that looks fantastic. The LED tech is mind-blowing because it, as Chris was saying, it allows the filmmakers that used to be able to see, driving shots in a Hitchcock movie, but now, in a 3D engine, you actually can move the camera and you can have 3D sort of, 3D motion and 3D sort of movement that goes along with those things. So I think it all adds up to the same goal. Now, it also can be used to do the exact reverse of what I'm saying as well. If it's used not well or not done with the right sort of advice or the right sort of, understanding of what it will give you.
Yeah. Is the Sandworm scene in Dune Part 2 an example of the benefits of doing that legwork beforehand? Because I heard another interview where you mentioned you thought that was going to be a really challenging shot because you had no reference point, like you couldn't kind of imagine what riding a giant sandworm would look like. You watch that in cinema, especially in IMAX, I feel like I was trying to wipe sand away from my face, like it was so real and so visceral. Did you use any of these technologies in kind of laying the groundwork for that?
I tell you where it could have been useful was during the planning stages when we were working out lenses. We were using Unreal Engine to game out effectively all of the positions that the sandworm was in, because the sandworm is going down the shadow side of the sand dune as Paul is falling to try and get onto it. Then it comes out into the sun. So we had to effectively position the sandworm carcass in a number of different places. And, we were able to game out sort of what we were shooting and when, based on sun paths, and when parts of the studio would become in shade, so we could shoot that scene, that part of the scene. But it also would allow us to lens up and create some lenses. And it would have potentially, we didn't go to that extent with it because we were already sort of so busy doing other things in Unreal that we didn't sort of go to the trouble of lensing up every single shot. But I think it would have helped a little bit. But what it would have done, again, going back to what I was saying, it would have actually given us the best tools to be the most efficient when we actually shot it. We couldn't have done that. I don't think we would have done that on a volume. The volumes are great for some things and not great for other things. And again, this is where I think knowledge is a really good thing for the industry to have, because sometimes decisions get made by people who don't know the ins and outs of filming something, to film something in an environment that maybe isn't appropriate. Like there's only a small part of that might have been efficient on the volume, but for the most part, it wouldn't have been.
I mean, that's a huge part of it, because advising what is the best approach for something is vital in terms of virtual production. Is not this a magic elixir of filmmaking that's going to solve every production situation and should be used for every single shot. Yeah, you can't sell that, and it's not the right tool. It's another tool, but among many. So there are times when you want to shoot a green screen shot, and you certainly can also create the LEDs to go green and pull a key, but also doing things live is actually pretty fun, and so I can imagine being out in Jordan and sand dunes, has its photographic advantages over trying to recreate that feel and that impact on an LED stage in a smaller footprint. What I like about Greig is everything is on the table, every production, and it's like you're starting from scratch every time, assuming, let's not just go with the same thing every time. I love that you're auditioning, prosumer cameras and every level of lens option from a $40 lens from eBay and shooting a multi-million-dollar production day with something that's cinematted or rehoused. But it's always about, okay, let's evaluate the tool and what I'm trying to create with that. And so you're talking about one of the progenitors of this technique, which is obviously encumbered by massive amounts of different technological systems all having to work in harmony with each other, and yet always looking at, okay, let's not assume anything. Let's look at all these different cameras. And what they did with the sort of the nimble cameras for the creator was very clever, and, the lens choice and trying to keep it very organic that, Gareth could move around very quickly, and that affected the photography and not having it be all this, even like a big green screen shoot to try to create visual effects. But no, let's do it the opposite way. Let's shoot it more organically and then add the VFX on top of it. And then there was a small virtual production component to that show as well, which I thought it made sense when you're going up into outer space in a space station or anything like that. Okay, we can create this on a stage. And then, the complete opposite, you're going completely organic on, the Dune series and harnessing what that brings to the production. So I love that aspect. It's like, don't assume anything and use the right tool for the right production and the right visual goal. So we don't try to push virtual production for every single job or every single shot. It's like, that shot, really, we should just go out into the back lot and shoot that live.
We found that on Mandalorian that was kind of the, thankfully on Mandalorian, I was able to start super early on that. In fact, that was one of the prerequisites that I explained to the producers, that in order for this to be successful, I had to be around as the scripts were being, disseminated by everybody. As soon as they were being written, they were coming to us. And, from what I understood from our early tests, I was able to say exactly what Chris just said was, all right, that scene's out in the desert in the middle of the day. We should be outside on blue screen. We have to be, because, I sort of at that time had an understanding of where the volume is good and where it isn't. But bear in mind, this is before anybody had done it. We hadn't actually shot anything at that point. So I was guessing what was going to be good and what wasn't going to be good. I was going, okay, so how many HMIs can we sit on an LED stage? Will that look like sunlight? Can they move? If there's two HMIs, what happens when we come wide? Is there cross shadows? What happens when the HMIs bounce and then hit the screens? How much flare out on the screen? Running that kind of the chess game that we all play on a shoot, but running it on a bit of technology perhaps that hasn't been done. But it's quite clear now, and I'm watching sort of fantastic versions of virtual production that are working really well and going, until, LED screens become more contrasty and higher brightness, we're really limited to kind of softer light sources. And, if we do use sun, then it needs to be kind of, sun shafts. Like, for example, the scene behind Chris there, if we decided there was going to be sun coming in there, they'd probably come in through windows and not through big areas of, skylight or something. So you need to kind of think about the, how you're actually going to shoot it as well as during the planning stage. So that's a big part why it's important to have the designer and the cinematographer know as much as possible, be advised properly, and, be given good kind of advice. And sometimes, as Chris just said, sometimes be told that sometimes it's not the right tool. Production-wise, you may be forced into a box because you have to shoot something on there. It's like, well, how do you then alter the scene or the dialogue or the environment to suit the fact that you have to shoot on the volume because you've got, time still left or scheduling issues?
Surely the only way to put yourself in a position where you're able and confident to make these choices is experience, right? There's no substitute for that.
I think I think experience is very important, but I also think it's talking to people who have done it talking to people with the right skill base. A cinematographer shouldn't be speaking to a producer about it. Not that they show you they shouldn't be speaking to a producer. Of course, they can talk to anybody they like. But the reality is the only people that they can get really focused, proper advice, cinematographer should take advice from another cinematographer, because it's only that role that has fulfilled and experienced all the problems that the cinematographer is going to face. But, talking to the designer, talking to the VFX supervisor, all those people can offer advice. And the more this happens and the more that people are shooting on a volume, there are going to be more voices to take advice from. So you might talk to 3 or 4 cinematographers and you might get 3 or 4 different answers. But at least from those 3 or 4 different answers, you can formulate your own opinion or your own decision about that.
Yeah, education is super important with this on every level. So I've been involved with master classes both on the student level as well as ASC members, and trying to bring everybody up to understand the technology. For me, the way I approach cinematography is always I want to be armed with as much information as I can understand. That's why I wrote an entire treatise on lenses, because I wanted to understand how optics were impacting my photography. Similarly with virtual production, I wanted to understand the tools that go behind it. Now, I'm not like going and building the environments in Unreal, and I'm not like shoving someone over and trying to man the operating station and control the actual function of the LED stage. But I do want to know as much as I can to help contribute and anticipate how the process will work, what will work, what not, also solve problems. Filmmaking is all just a set of problem solving and aesthetic opinions, right? So you're leveraging your experience, which is your toolkit, when you walk into a production and say like, okay, I've done a poor man's process shot, or I've shot in the desert and I know how to do this. And so you're bringing your toolkit of experience, and then your sort of curated, cultivated taste level, your aesthetic, and that's your imprint on your work, is those 2 things. So how do you bolster both of those in a sort of newer technique? For me, it's like, okay, I need to understand this as much as possible so that I can leverage that understanding to have confidence in how I can do my work on the stage and to deliver a result. So knowing where it's good or not, knowing how the technology functions, knowing the peculiar of different camera configurations with tracking systems that have to talk to Unreal, and then understanding that there may be some latency involved or that can impact the operating style. All those things are part of the learning curve. And so I think the more that people become versed in it and are trying to harness the technique in the right ways and having success, some of the fear of sort of the unfamiliarity that certainly like a UPM may have, or like, well, why do I want to do this risky technique? Let's just shoot on blue screen. I know that'll work, and stick with this sort of the tried and true, and not put their neck on the line. So the education's huge. So we need to raise the bar for everybody. I've heard of, failed virtual productions, and that doesn't help anybody, and it just sort of introduces a level of fear that people may not want to adopt it, and then where it could empower the filmmakers, you're sort of rolling back to, your comfort blanket of technique. So
a common misunderstanding, I think, about shooting on a volume or virtual production is that it's all about what's on the screen in camera, which makes sense because that's what people see. If you're shooting on a volume that sort of is a 360 or a volume that has significant surroundings and ceiling, it's one of the most enjoyable experiences that I've had, because you get to control every single thing about it. And what you see on the screens is a small part of actually what the LED panels are doing. They're actually, I treat them more as a lighting tool. I know I've had debates and discussions with people about this, going, well, the panels aren't designed for lighting and you really should be lighting with other lights. And that's fine. That's other people's opinion. And I 100% respect that. But I've had the most success where I use the panels to actually light the subject, because, I'm all about truthfulness, going back to that question that you asked earlier. And this kind of goes back to, regardless of virtual production, even on a location shoot, I will try really hard not to pull out a light if I can avoid it. And it's not because I don't like lights, because I have to light with lights every day. But it's like the second you bring out a light, you've just introduced an element of false. It's false. It's incorrect. To make it correct requires a lot of work. So if you then put out 10 lights, and then you've just, times that problem by 10. So the good thing about shooting on a volume, if you can use the panels to create light on the sides and on the top, is it creates a truthfulness to the light if your background's designed to do so. So I find that to be really fantastic. I think shooting on a volume that's been properly designed, properly considered, and the loads have been properly designed and considered is one of the most enjoyable experiences that I've had as a DP. When it works, it's fun. When it doesn't, when it's not working, it can be really tough.
There's a double-edged sword with like turning on, if you're in this volume, is like, okay, you don't need a light at all. For example, like there's an expectation of like you just turn it on and you're lit, and that's partially true. These panels are throwing photons around, and they are interacting and lighting and providing illumination. But there's still craft involved, right? There's still choices. So what Greig is talking about too is that you can use these panels as a lighting tool. You can control and refine. So you can have an off-camera panel still be the organic environment, but you can also brighten it off-camera. So you're getting those tones, that interactivity, if it's got some animations to it or whatever, but it's just brighter, throwing more light up because it's off-camera. Similarly, you can also darken portions and create negative fill, or you can bring in above head like a light card, right? A white or any other color of the rainbow, really, pretty easily. So we do a lot of car work on this stage, for example, and rather have to rig a big soft box overhead, we can use a light card on the ceiling and light the sheet metal pretty quickly and get to a really good result. But there's still that eye that has to guide it. And although these panels can look great on camera, they are missing certain wavelengths that could be problematic for skin tone. So there's sort of a little bit of a give and take in terms of how much you augment that and fill in some of the fuller spectrum units on set, or how you build that into your planning for skin tone and still have the harnessing all the ambience that the volume is providing. So that's part of it. It's like it doesn't eliminate the job of the cinematographer. It's just another tool in the kit that you can definitely consider. But because it's, depending on the size of that volume, it could be throwing out a significant amount of the percentage of the lighting that you're using. So you may have to use less lights. You may need to have less of a grip electric crew, because you're able to utilize this tool as a lighting instrument and not have to bring in big flags, but maybe bring in a black card on the actual panel itself. So you can be pretty nimble and work quickly. So that's exciting about it, because you're able to be spontaneous. You can move the camera around with the director, and once you've created the environment and you've dressed a set, which is the most critical part of it, is like the worst case scenario is just a person standing on a blank stage with a wall behind them and trying to sell that. Well, as soon as you cut to their feet, it like, okay, you see them on an empty stage. So anything they contact and touch and interact with, you need a physical environment. And it's that handoff of the practical with the virtual, which is a huge part of the discussion, certainly with the production designer, is like democratizing, well, this could be our virtual backdrop, and I need you to build this, because they're going to talk and they walk on this, and they have to climb up these steps. You can't climb up on the steps on the wall if they're just a virtual asset, right? So anything they interact with has to be physical. And that's really important to understand, that you need to have that handoff of real and virtual. And that's where it gets exciting, because once you've created that environment, it's not like a VFX with a blue screen and green screen where let's get another shot. Well, that shot now has to be composited, potentially roto or tracked. So that's all additional steps in post-production for VFX. That's another line item on the budget. Once you've created these assets, it's and dressed a set, it's like any other physical location. So, hey, let's grab the camera, let's get this shot, let's get that shot. It's all sort of free of charge. It's all built into the process. And that is really empowering, I think, once directors sort of get comfortable with the fact that they're on this stage, but then they see, I can get this shot now, and that looks amazing. And you know what? There's a tree in the background that looks a little funky. Well, let's just grab that tree and move it out of the way. It's like, we could do this. Yeah, we could do anything. That building, let's shove that huge skyscraper out of the way. The gaming engine doesn't care about the scale. So that's exciting. That's what's really empowering about the technique is obviously we're composing shots and we're coming up with shots, and we're also being spontaneous with the technology.
Christopher, you mentioned that you'd seen virtual production shoots not work out or fail. Is there a common reason why that happened?
I think it's in the prep. You have to understand what you're trying to achieve with it. This is not the best example, but it's coming to mind. I think some people equate virtual production with like a VR studio, like XR, like that you use in like broadcast. So, for example, LEDs on the floor. Okay, so we want to have a virtual production stage. Well, why don't you have LEDs on the floor? It's like that's part of it, right? It's like, well, okay, what do you want to have up on there? Well, we want to have it look like carpet, or we want to have it look like wood grain floor. Well, when you're standing on a real wood floor, the wood underneath your shoe is not illuminating the bottom of your shoe. So emissive light is very different than a reflective surface. Those panels that are on the floor will also have a reflection component because there is some reflectivity to the surface of the LED, but it's also emissive light, and it looks completely different. Now, one application where I would absolutely ask for an LED floor is, imagine if you're doing a period piece about, the steel workers in downtown Manhattan in the 30s, and they're up on the girder beams and tossing rivets to each other, and you have a camera looking from above, and they're up on this beam, and that beam is a practical thing on the floor, but then you want to look down and see, the canyons of Manhattan below them. Well, an LED floor could do that really well, and it would have a tracked position so you can get the parallax between the beam he's standing on and the other beams, which may be virtual. That's a great application of a floor. But wood grain or carpet, not so much. So it's really picking the technology. And depending on your angles, if you're trying to create some weird perspective skew and you have a join line between a floor and a practical floor and the wall, and it's like, where does that handoff happen? It can become really tricky. So really, the previs, and the environments, and sort of even tech vising these shots and understanding, okay, this shot doesn't really work with the way we've constructed the set. Knowing that it in foresight is really important, and I think that's really great. What Greig was talking about in terms of using this as a prep tool, a pre-visualization tool. The thing I love about Unreal Engine is we are starting to use this at every iteration of the process, like Greig alluded to. So we are doing commercials, for example. There's a whole process of pitching to trying to get the job, right? So directors are building decks and mood boards and treatments and all that. So part of what we're doing now is leveraging this gaming engine to create the deck, right? So you can create an environment that looks bespoke to that particular concept, and then put in a metahuman performer. If it's a vehicle commercial, you can get the wireframe of the actual vehicle, drop it into that, and now you take a virtual camera and you start staging shots. Well, those shots are very indicative of a storyboard, right? And those storyboards can become very accurate. And if you know you're doing the production on a virtual production stage, the environments that you start creating in that treatment, in the deck, and then in the storyboards, and then in the previs, you start plussing up the textures and the rendering of the lighting. Those same environments you created now could go onto the LED wall and then be framing up the same shot. A director I work with did a commercial for Lexus, and he did that very workflow. And he had the virtual car and the storyboards lined up, and the reflections on the window of the virtual car when they went onto the virtual stage and put the practical car in there and lined up the same shot. The reflections on the car from the buildings in the actual shot, the storyboard and previs was exactly the same, identical. It was like, this is nuts. So utilizing that technique is pretty incredible to be able to stage, and also it's non-lossy. All the sweat equity that went into the pitch deck and into the storyboarding, and then the previs animatic, and then the environments for the backdrop, and even also like, we need an aerial shot. Well, we're doing this all in virtual production. Well, okay, we had a commercial where they had a whole California coastline, and we built miles of track for the car to drive in, basically car process, right? But then they wanted to get an aerial shot. Well, we have this environment already built. Let's just fly a virtual camera in our Unreal asset and create a full VFX shot. But it was all created in the game engine as well. So again, now it's in post-production. You can utilize those assets across the board, and that's super exciting because it's still authored by the filmmakers from the onset, right? And depending on your relationship and your time and prep, like what you had, Greig, with the extensive prep on Mandalorian and tech visiting and going into the environments and giving lighting notes, and you're starting to build in lighting units into the virtual as well as what would be executed on the practical set. That's great because now you're designing the look as the cinematographer. You're authoring that. I've been called in to light virtual car commercials as I would if it were a practical car. And what's great about virtual lighting is like I could bring in a big softbox, put it right in shot, and light the car with a unit that's super close, but I can make it invisible to the virtual camera. So it's a complete physics cheat, which is great. But understanding like, okay, I need a big bounce source because I can only reflect a car. I can't light a car. I mean, if I put a spotlight on a car, you'll get a reflection of the spotlight and some level of illumination, but you're going to reflect the light of that car. So you have to do these big, bounces and textiles and to create that sort of gleam across the sheet metal. So virtual lighting, I think, is going to be another subset of ideally people with that cultivated taste, that storytelling, the skill of telling a story with a visual. It's just a different mechanism, right? So now we're lighting with virtual lights and tools, but it's the same thing. It's like, where are you placing that light? So even if it's only for lighting diagrams for a big battle sequence at the end of Dune, or if it's the entire lighting a video game, it's the same tool set. So I think understanding these tools that are all converging in virtual production happens to be at the middle of it, because we have the gaming industry, we have VFX, we have traditional filmmaking, we have all the tools that go into the lighting and visual creation of those, all converging right at this nexus point of virtual production. And so I think the more you arm yourself with the knowledge of all of those, I think there's a definite future for us as cinematographers, even with this, nebulous question mark of what AI will impact on.
Yeah, which we will cover in a future episode. That's a promise. The final question that I wanted to ask you both, I think there might be some of what you were just talking about in the answer to it, Christopher. There's a quote from Greig that I wanted to put to both of you. If my work is not seen but felt, then I've succeeded. Do you feel that virtual production is already sophisticated enough to be unseen by an audience?
I think it can be. And I think the intention always should be that it's unseen. Always. I mean, the second that somebody knows something has been done, the tools that we use to create it, either through the planning or through the shooting or through the post-production, the game's been lost. So I do believe the tools are there, but it all depends on how you use and how you plan for those things. I think that there's not a, I've seen stuff that I'm not overly fond of. I've been on a stage where loads have come in and I've not bought it. I won't talk about them here because they're based on stuff I've already done, but where the loads come in, or the plates come in, or the array stuff comes in, or all that stuff comes in, put a lens on it, and you just say, this is not better than it. This is not as good as reality, or not better than reality. That's the bar that I've sort of put in. I think this needs to be as good as what it would look like, but better, because you can control things, as Christopher was saying about sun or light or card, or it's got to be as good as, if not better. So that's the bar that I put in, because it's if the bar's lower, then it's easy to kind of slip up. So yeah,
I would definitely agree with that. It's like, again, we're trying to create this illusion, right? And if we're drawing attention to it, I don't think that's the goal, right? We want to be invisible with our work, and we want to just try to move people emotionally. And the fact that we're using this tool to be either more efficient with production or solve some problems or create realities that don't exist is beside the point. You still want the emotion to feel true, right? And I think whether or not an audience can identify what is wrong with the frame, the eye is very adept in figuring out when something is wrong, right? So at the best, it's like you want that work to be invisible. You want it to feel organic and like you were at a real location. And some of what Greig's my favorite work of Greig's is when it's very sort of stripped down. It's minimalist. I discovered you, Greig, with Bright Star, and I was like, that was a really lovely film, and it was like, I'm seeing something. I don't know this person. This is really beautiful work, and I've been watching you since then, and like, again, I see a through line in all of your work, and so it's not surprising to me that you're able to bring out that realism in what is arguably one of the most artificial techniques that we can possibly employ, which is get a bush in a TV, a dumb TV, an unsophisticated device here that potentially can cause all sorts of issues like moiré and stuff, and try to make that feel like it's real, right? So,
that's what's interesting about filmmaking in general, though, isn't it? Like, that's what I discovered. I used to be a photographer. I studied photography, and then when I started shooting films or started shooting drama or whatever, it would constantly surprise me about how false filmmaking is. Unless you're shooting a documentary, right? Even when you are shooting a documentary, people know you're there. Unless you're shooting like the Big Brother series where you're behind mirrors and like, it's false. Everything's false. Everything that comes out of someone's mouth is chosen because of a reason. And so it's a constant battle with filmmakers to try and make things feel honest and real when they're not. And so what I love about virtual production, it takes away, or it helps a number of those barriers that occur that can stop those things from happening. Like the environment, let's say we're at sunrise. Let's do a sunrise scene on the volume, which I've done before, Mandalorian. I've done some at Batman. Like, you try doing that for real in New York at dawn or at dusk, and watch how long it takes. Watch how long an intimate scene with two people talking quietly and gently about something significant. That's hard, and that's to try and sort of get that degree of realism for real is impossible. So therefore, you go to something that's unreal, like no pun intended, to get something that feels real. I mean, it's kind of the beauty of the system, and that's why I've been so passionate about sort of exploring it and learning about it, because any tool that we have to take those barriers away from our directors, those barriers of we can't shoot until the sun comes out, there's a cloud in the sky, there's a helicopter flying over, sun's gone down, we're out of time, all those things, the more that we can create, reduce or remove those barriers for our filmmakers, I think that the better off the industry is going to be.
Yeah. If the audience was able to see what's outside of the frame that we present, if you had a movie that was like in a 360 theater and you have the movie, but then you have everything, the pandemonium and chaos that's occurring just outside the frame borders with boom bikes and groups holding things and people trying to feed a rope from the bottom. I mean, all the comedy that's going on the periphery of that little rectangle that we're presenting. I mean, I would almost put that up on MGM Sphere, right, and just watch all the chaos of the crew.
Yes.
It is a circus, and we call ourselves a bunch of carnies for a reason, because it is complete pandemonium. But as long as we're in that frame.
But even the amount of garbage that went on leading up to getting to that point, like to be able to put that frame in that spot, like all the garbage that would have gone on with location scouting or losing locations, or like that in itself is a comedy show. So again, those are things where, if you can control the environment through either good planning, through virtual production, through good design of a volume load, standing in a controlled environment where you can control the light really carefully, that's where you kind of go, well, all of those garbage moments leading up to that point, or all that comedy moment, as Christopher was saying, like, you just reduce all those factors down and you get to the core and the essence of what you are filming, and the scene that you're filming. And so I think that's where VP is at its best, is when it gets rid of the excess, it gets rid of all the garbage, and it sort of really isolates that. Now, just to get on my soapbox again for a second, the danger is that people go, yeah, well, you don't need all that stuff. You can lose that. You can lose your electrician to the grips, or you can lose this, that, or the other, which some ways is true, but in as trade-off, you need to get something back for that. And that's time, that's planning, and that's a voice in the conversation. So you would never, ever ask a DP to walk onto a location or a designer to walk into a location without having fully scouted it, fully discussed it with the director, and fully blocked it, and fully gone there with their technicians to make sure they can light through windows and stuff. You would never, in the same breath, expect a DP or a designer to walk onto a volume, onto a volume load, without having fully explored how to achieve those goals. That I've heard instances of that happening, and I was like, wow, that's where the pendulum swings too far the other way. There are the money people, just go, well, we can save all this money. We can save, I heard Greig Fraser talk. You can get rid of all the garbage. And yeah, you can, but you've got to make sure that there's a compensatory level that people get because of that. And it's time and conversation and discussion and infrastructure to have the DP, designer, director understand and learn from people that have done it before, and that will fully educate them to the pros and the cons of what they're about to get into.
And all of this is sort of at the onus of the filmmakers and their command of the medium, right? If you have a director who has the confidence and vision of, how to execute and command of what they're trying to construct, that is going to have a massive impact on the flow of any production, whether it's, you're filming in a backyard or you're on a massive sand dune with, 300 extras running, or if you're on a virtual production stage with, a bucket and a broom. And, that we can't separate that. That's the craft, right? And so when we're working with filmmakers who have a vision and a command of the language, everything is going to fall in line according to that. And so this all, again, becomes a question of education then. It's, understanding the form, the art, the technique, and all those things carry over. I can draw a direct line from Fritz Lang's Metropolis to this, and I can understand how to leverage ideas from legacy techniques of, using a mirror or a beam splitter or like all these things draw inspiration from a disparate field or something that's been done before, and then you figure out a new way to apply it or spin it, right? This is the latest spin on a host of techniques. So I'm a big advocate of knowing where we come from, right? So we're not reinventing the wheel, but we are maybe, redesigning some new features on the wheel and understanding that, it keeps on rolling forward, and understanding where we came from in the background can help guide us in the way we're going.
Beautifully put. And I think on that note, we have reached the end of the time we have available. And so all that remains for me to do is to thank Christopher and Greig very much for their time and their insight. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Ellie.
Pleasure to hear from you. And to you watching, thank you very much for sticking with us. This has been the Voice of Virtual Production, and we will, of course, be back very shortly.
Everything can benefit from virtual production because of control. Let's talk about the financial side of things. You're going to benefit. You're not having to worry about rotoscoping, keying. Compositing is generally being done in camera.